Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch, and if you want to support me, that is, on my Patreon. Today, we are doing Breaking Step, Chapter 48. Mez, Don said, 3 in to the left. Prepare to defend yourself. The archer moved and found himself lined up with the opposing sorcerer, who acted immediately. The ball of earth formed and flew. Mez crouched as he tapped one end of his bow on the ground. A wall of flame shot up, consuming the ball. Tibs felt its heat all the way to the other side of the board. That's new, Jekyll commented. There's only so much I can do shooting arrows, Mez replied, dusting himself off as he stood. My instructor made it clear he wasn't letting me take my test until I showed I could do more than shoot trick arrows. They do get annoying, don't they? Don said, with their constant push for us to be better. Tibs, one forward. You should be safe, but watch how the dungeon moves its archer. It could set up 2 against you if we're not careful. Ha! Gani exclaimed, like I'm falling for that again. Her archer moved to a position that Tibs thought might be setting it up to go against Jackal, their lord, for the game. Yeah, the fighter said, it's almost like they want us to survive our runs. How inhumane of them. Especially since you all agree the guild has no interest in seeing to it you survive, Kumdar added. Individuals aren't the guild, Dunn replied. Kumdar, left diagonal, 3 spaces. Are you certain? The cleric asked, looking the board over. Is Jekyll not more, I'm the strategist? The sorcerer snapped. Jekyll can take care of himself. The fighter shrugged when Kumdar checked with him. Tibs tried to work out the consequences of the move, but he didn't understand the game well enough. What he knew was that while Don didn't understand Gani was intelligent, he was aware there was a cunning involved in everything the dungeon did, and that the dungeon understood something of the people doing the runs. A lot of what he'd gone through this game was attempting to trick Gani into making a mistake. Tibbs simply had no idea if it was working. I think someone's in for a surprise, Gani gloated as one of her sorcerer lined up with Jackal. I'm sorry, Tibbs. She didn't sound it as the ball of fire hit the fighter and stuck to him until it went out. Jackal dusted himself off. I'm quite fine with improving on what I'm quite fine with just improving on what I can already do. His armor lost the gray hue that had matched a Jackal's skin. I am getting tired of how you're always getting stronger, Gani grumbled, and Tibbs smiled. Mazzano, if you'll do the honor, Don instructed. The archer moved diagonally 1 square, lining him up with Gani's lord, and pulled on the bow while the fighter raised its shield. How? Gani exclaimed as the arrow became so bright Tibbs had to look away. The explosion sent pieces across the room. I can't believe that worked, Mez said, awed. The archer can't move like that, Gani yelled as her other pieces crumbled away. How was Mez able to do that? Tibbs asked. He's the archer. According to whom? Don asked. I never stated which role he had. Each motion you had him do was that of the archer, Kumdar stated. Were they? The sorcerer smiled. You had him move and turn, Jekyll said. It was 2 or 3 ahead, then to the left or right for the rest of the move. Don beamed. Did any of you pay attention to how many squares Mazzano moved? I never told him that. Tibbs thought back on the game. Like Jekyll said, Don had instructed the archer on how many forward and then a direction. He'd been too focused on looking ahead and listening to Gani for any idea of what was to come to pay attention to the rest of the move. It seemed Gani had been in a similar situation. But he's an archer. Jekyll motioned to Mez, which I counted on the dungeon also assuming, since it's the only role I've used him in before. After the board allowed that first move without me having to state how many he had to finish it, I figured it was an autonomous system independent of the one that decides how to move the pieces. That it was just about making sure that part was focused on defending okay, its pieces, so it wouldn't notice Mez wasn't moving as an archer did, but as the lady could. You two worked this out ahead of time, Jekyll said, not entirely pleased as Genny growled. I hate you, Dawn. I truly do. One of these days I will get the upper hand. Mez crossed the board and tapped the shield over the chest. Tibs, he called as the distant rumble vibrated the floor. Tibs checked the chest, then opened it. 3 healing potions, 2 of essence, a sword, a shield. Dawn got the essence potion, Jekyll, Counter, and Tibs, 1 healing each. Mez had all those he'd entered the dungeon with. I swear, Dawn grumbled, scrambling up the side of the pillar. You're trying to kill me. It wasn't that hard of a jump, Tibs replied, distracted by studying the shifting floor's room lamp. The shifting's floor. Oh boy. Okay, the landscape of the shifting floor room. Nothing moved, so that while it looked like the sorcerer's feet had brushed the other platform, he had grabbed onto the side before sliding too far. Not hard for you, Dawn panted, rolling on his back. Now that he once he pulled himself on top. You will throw yourself, wow, off a chasm for fun. I am a sorcerer. My idea of exercise consists of lifting heavy books. Clearly, he'd overestimated Dawn's ability this time. He couldn't remember how he judged them while ice, but that last run, while pissed at the sorcerer, he definitely made sure he had all the short ones, so he wouldn't have an excuse to cause one of them to die. As a dungeon runner, Comdar said, it may be to your benefit to expand to something more physical. Clearly, you haven't seen the books I've been reading. Comdar's right, Jekyll said. You might be a scholar one day, but you need to survive the dungeon first. I have survived. You almost fell, Mez pointed out. The fall wouldn't have killed me, Dawn replied disparagingly. It could have killed one of us, the archer replied. What do you want me to say, Mez? I'm sorry, okay? I'm doing the best I can, but this isn't my kind of room. I want you to say you're going to accept Jackal's offer to train you. You do want me killed, Dawn replied, horrified. I'm not that hard of a trainer, Jekyll said, smirking. You are stone through and through. It doesn't get any harder. Think of what it'll do for you to... Think of what it'll do... Think of what it'll do for you to have some of that rubbing off you. Okay, I know what I'm going for. This is not properly written. Think of what it'll do. Okay. Think of what it'll do to have some of that rubbing off on you. Yeah, that's basically it. Krosef won't be happy, Tibs said, deciding on a longer but more suited path. Not that kind of rubbing, Jackal protested. It better not be, Dawn said, pushing himself to his feet. Otherwise I'll carve up something off you and Krosef can come complaining to me all he wants. He wouldn't complain to you, Mez said. He'd chastise Jackal for doing something stupid yet again. Then he'd get him to use his loot money to pay a cleric to grow it back so he could force him to go without until he begs for it. It's scary how well you know my man, Jekyll said, grinning, considering not one of you shares a bed with him. It is possible that it has something to do with how you are both far too willing to share the things you partake of in said bed, Comdar said, in a neutral tone that sounded forced. Even those of us not doing all they can not to pay attention end up learning things we would rather not. I thought you loved learning secrets, Don said. Nothing these two do is secret, the cleric grumbled. You know, Jekyll said as he and Tibs pushed the wall and revealed the passage. This is almost too... Don had the fighter against the wall, hand on his mouth. Don't even think of finishing that. Jekyll moved the hand. I was just pointing out that... Tibs kicked him in the shin. You know I don't feel those anymore, right? Just stop talking, Tibs said. The dungeon listens, Don said, and it might consider anything you say a challenge. Fine, Jekyll threw his hands up. I won't say anything, he grinned. It probably knows how I feel already anyway. Since neither Ganny nor Stowe commented, they had to be busy elsewhere. How are we doing this? Jekyll asked from the open door to the boss room. As with the last time, the dragon was at the far back, but this time the row of monsters already stood between the closest set of columns. They stood still as statues, and even to Tibbs' sense, they were the only one there. Not that he sensed much through the ever-present miasma. Still, there would be many more. Quigley had confirmed that. We might have to sacrifice fighting the boss to work out how to avoid triggering the other attacks, Don said. Quigley beat the room, Jekyll replied, and nearly lost some of his team, Mess pointed out. None of us are the strategists Quigley is. I'm stronger than he is, Jekyll said. This is not a room meant for pure strength or toughness, Don stated. Being smart is how we beat it. Fine. Can we beat those and then be smart? Jekyll asked. Tibbs? Don asked. I want to check the floor to make sure there aren't any triggers that will activate the next set of creatures between us and those. There won't be any, Jekyll grumbled, but leaned against the wall. Tibbs was as meticulous as he could while remaining aware of how much time they had. They made good time through the other rooms now that they were familiar with all of them, but he couldn't waste it here, especially without knowing how long it would take to work out how to undo each of the following triggers. The floor's clear, he said, returning. I don't sense anything in the air set to react to us, Tibbs said, and Tibbs raised an eyebrow. I described what this floor feels like to my teacher, and he gave me exercises to pierce through this kind of fog. I didn't say anything about that before, Mess said. Don shrugged. We knew the way and the traps. Nothing I picked up contradicted that. Good to know, Jekyll said, walking toward the creature. Now we fight. Tibbs joined the fighter. You're not rushing ahead after the fight. I'm going to need to heal a bit before that. Not even then, Tibbs warned. You let me and Don do what we can first. Then we think about fighting. I'm the one in charge, Tibbs. You want me to repeat that to Krosef? Jekyll grinned. Actually, I'd like that. He feels the need to show me how I'm actually wrong, and then he pushes. I don't want to know. Stop, Don ordered, and they both stood still. There's a difference in the fog ahead of you, the source said. It's probably the trigger that activates them. Tibbs tried to sense the difference Don was noticing, but it was just an undefined miasma to him. Then you and Maz get ready, the fighter instructed Kumdar as Kumdar stood at their side. Once the fight is done, sense ahead for the next one. He stepped forward and the creatures came alive. Tibbs ran at the rattling, high sword and shield forming. He cut one, then another, blocked the bunnyling that joined the attack, grabbed it, and pulled it in the way of the spear that formed where Tibbs had been. He smirked at the metal sorcerer, then etched a quick, sticky attack to keep it from etching anything else. Those creatures all seemed to need to perform the etching the way Alistair taught him. He jumped out of the way of the wave of metal essence, and the knoll which had been sneaking closer was cut apart. Of course, he couldn't ignore what raw essence could do. He blasted the sorcerer with a wave of water strong enough it shattered when they hit a column. His smirk was broken by pain in his side. He turned and hit the rogue with a stone fist, breaking its face. How had it sneaked this close without Tibbs noticing or sensing the sword? How had the abyss blasted thing hurt him? Metal couldn't... Bone. The fucking thing was made of bone. He pulled it out and filled himself with purity. He'd drink a potion to explain it once the fight was over. He threw the sword and at a rushing knoll and missed. And he slammed a spiked shield into it, growing the ice until it came out his back. He kicked it off and searched around for another creature to kill. They were crumbling away, leaving behind silver pieces and knives and jewelry. Those were new. Mez drank a potion, reminding Tibs to do the same before Don questioned the lack of an injury to match the damaged armor. Don, Tibs, Jekyll called. Do your thing while the rest of us collect the fallen loot. He looked up. I knew there was a reason I liked you. The lack of response surprised Tibs. He'd expected Stowe to be interested in these fights. Tibs stayed a pace behind Don as the sorcerer took careful steps until Comdar called out to them. The cleric indicated a column. There is something purposely hidden there. It was decorated with symbols that went all the way onto the floor, forming a circle around it, roughly 2 paces across. He crouched on the outside, trying to work out the symbols. Are these arcanists? He asked Don. I haven't learned all of them yet. The sorcerer shook his head. They aren't anything I've read about. He cut Tibbs's head. Don't. There's something about the essence within the circle. Tibbs sensed around the column, but didn't learn anything. The miasma wasn't an even spread of all essences, but unlike Don, he wasn't making out any pattern in the differences. So we had no way to know if this was a new kind of trigger or just more of the same mess. He placed a hand on the floor outside the circle. This is going to take time, he said. He said, the water spreading through the carved symbol. There doesn't seem to be any cracks that would be a physical trigger, so this might be essence flared through the water where some of the symbols were located. I triggered something, he yelled as the air shimmered on the other side of the 2 columns and creatures appeared. They were new. Tibbs noticed scaly skin and elongated muzzle, then he was too busy fighting. And that concludes chapter 48 of Breaking Step. If you want to know when the next chapter is going to be up, subscribe and hit the bell. Wait, no, that doesn't feel right. If you are enjoying this, leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter is going to be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read the story and the other 2 books in the series, they are up for free on Royal Road. If you want to support me, that's on my Patreon. And if you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. The links are in the note. And with that, I shall wish you a good day.